Strap in for this episode of Treaty Talks. Ko te manuhiri I tēnei rangi ko Waike, ko Veronica Tawhai, one of the instrumental players behind Matike Mai, a report that looks into constitutional change here in Aotearoa.
But what we had here was a very specific form of colonialism called settler colonialism, and that's when the colonial power goes, actually, the resource that I need here isn't what we can extract.
Yeah,
the resources that we need here is the land, and what we need the land for is as a home for our people. And so you natives that are on this land, what we need you to do
is get.
Is go.
We're going to cover off a few things in this episode, but mainly look into how we begin the process of restoration of our tino rangatiratanga. It's going to be a goodie. Kia ori te mai.
Veronica Tawhai, no mai, rau mai, e mihi ana ki a koe. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and have a kōrero with us. For this very important kaupapa, I te tuatahi, whakamohio mai kia mātou, ko wai koe?
Ai, tēnā koutou, hoi ko Hukurangi Te Maunga, ko wā pūtea, ko Ngāti Porou te iwi, ko te papa tipu o upohatu te whenua. Ai, Veronica Tawhai taku ingoa. He kāko tiriti au.
Yeah, let's start there. You've been a tiriti kaiako for a very long time.
I have.
At Massey University, but you don't teach now, but you're still there?
Yep, so I lectured for a while at Massey University and I did teach the Te Tiriti o Waitangi paper, but previous to that and ongoing from there, I'm part of a educators network called Te Atukura Educators. Yep. So we provide Te Tiriti o Waitangi wānanga, also some strategic Māori development wānanga. I've also been working with another group on Matike Mai Aotearoa wānanga. Yeah, but that's our network.
It sounds like, in my conversations with you prior to this, that you are very busy. Is there a massive need for treaty education? Or not a need, I know that there's a need, but is there an appetite around the motu? Because you do seem very busy, like you're travelling, doing wānanga 24/7.
Yeah, so definitely over the past year there has been an increase in demand. There was already a demand there with regards to different groups that were wanting Te Tiriti education. Half of those were people that just wanted to know how they can strengthen their Te Tiriti practice or how they honour Te Tiriti in their mahi. There were also different government groups because of things like the Public Services Act, where you need some Te Tiriti competency. But certainly, sis, over the past year, what we've seen is a huge increase in the demand for Te Tiriti education, and primarily people are seeking one thing, and that is clarity. You know, clarity around what is happening, why is it happening. This is with regards to the Treaty Principles Bill, mainly, but then there's also some other questions there. And so, you know, what our rōpū do is that we introduce people to, you know, what is happening, but also then the very notion of principles, because what we've been saying is actually anyone who is a Te Tiriti practitioner would not be surprised at what is happening, and especially things not necessarily the Treaty Principles Bill, but like the agreement in the National New Zealand First Coalition agreement in terms of withdrawing references to the treaty principles. That's now been a kaupapa of New Zealand First for almost 20 years. Like they had the 2006 Treaty of Waitangi Principles Deletion Bill. Yeah. And so while some people are going...
Like straight up, just not even trying to hide what they were trying to do. We want to delete it.
Yep. And 2006. And so this is the thing, is that anyone who's been working in the field of Te Tiriti o Waitangi has seen all those things a bit. That's nearly a 20-year kaupapa for them, you know. And so we've just been really clarifying for people, you know, where the Te Tiriti debate has got into, you know, why some of those things are happening, and then our particular focus in Te Atukura Educators is that we then update people with regards to the evidence around exactly what's written in Te Tiriti, exactly what's written in the treaty, why those things are in there. But we live in such a amazingly exciting time, my sis, with regards to the evidence, because these myths that we had, that were dehumanising myths in terms of, oh, you know, our tipuna had never heard of these words and we just signed anyway. You know, it's such a great time to live in because we are letting all of that go.
because none of it's true. And so in terms of the evidence that's been generated from the tribunal, from hapu that have been willing to come forward with their kōrero, it's an incredibly healing time because it's a humanising time. And so, so even though very busy, sis, I get a lot of joy from this work. It is difficult work in terms of, that unfortunately the current political climate has meant that all those with racist views have a green light. So, the wānanga are a little bit more difficult, but certainly those will only be a few instances, and primarily New Zealanders are really open to learning. So, congrats on this series. It helps.
It's interesting you say that it's an exciting time as someone who's so deeply entrenched in mahi around Te Tiriti. For someone like me, it feels like a really scary time.
Yep.
And is that just something because I don't understand and I only see what's happening in social media and I only see all the divisive stuff that the government is trying to do? And so why do you think that it is an exciting time? Like, what can you see happening that I can't?
No, sis, I would say it is a scary time. Some of the things that the government is trying to do are very dangerous in terms of Indigenous rights, and our rights as Māori. One of the things that we know that they are doing with the Treaty Principles Bill is that they are trying to redefine, tino rangatiratanga, but it really is like the redefinition of the rights that were guaranteed in Te Tiriti is one of the things that is under attack. And in particular, in the first iteration of that bill, what it did is that it took rangatiratanga off Māori, changed it to be only over property, and then gave it to everyone. And what it's doing when it does that is that it's trying to erase us as Indigenous people or as tangata whenua, which is really, so they're colonising, that particular principle is colonising. And so, that's just one thing amongst the many different things that are happening. The attack on te reo, the attack on our ability to, make decisions and have a voice. So that's, for example, the removal of Māori wards, and that all those different local councils, had to make a decision whether or not to keep them or get rid of them. But if they chose to keep them, they then also now have to have a public poll. So it's not just this giving of people needing to make choices, but it does appear that the government is trying to do whatever they can, to erase these massive, massive gains that generation before us were able to get, and who knows when we'll be able to get those things back. So don't get me wrong, it definitely is a scary time because we haven't seen this level of attack, in some time. I would say last time was like 20 years ago with Don Brash and that, but they weren't in government, The exciting part of it, though, is how far the Waitangi Tribunal has been able to take us in terms of our understanding, because this huge confusion and distraction that we have had with, the texts are different and, there's conflicts in the text and that's what's caused all our conflict. Actually, we now know that none of that is true and that we can let that all go.
It's really not that complicated, right?
It really seriously isn't. And so I really mihi to the tribunal from all the work that they've done, because it's that evidence base that we're able to draw from. And so if there is something scary for me, it's not only all the treaty references that are being pulled out of current legislation, but it's the fact that the Waitangi Tribunal has now been attacked, because they are by far have been a really important institution in terms of advancing our understanding. And so, we're just really waiting and hoping that nothing's going to happen to them in terms of all the threats to close them down, etc. That is how it works. The more citizens that we can actually connect with, other New Zealanders, Māori, all our communities, the raising of awareness as to what it's actually about. Those are then the types of representatives we'll get in our political system. So this is just a time. I absolutely believe it will pass. Our job is to try and minimise the harm that they cause right now, but we will be able to carry on once they're gone.
Yeah.
For a little while now, a group of very onto-it lawyers and leaders in the Tiriti space have been working on a report called Matike Mai. Veronica is one of them. It's gold dreaming up in Aotearoa that Te Tiriti o Waitangi intended.
So, I kōrero ana koe mo te constitutional change or constitutional transformation. Whakamohio hia kia tātou, hia tēnei mea Matike Mai.
Yeah, Matike Mai. Yep, no reira, ko Mona Jackson, rau ko wha makere mutu, ngā kai kōkiri, tēnei kaupapa, and I was invited in maybe 2012 into this kaupapa. Now, the first thing I want to say, whānau, about Matike Mai Aotearoa or constitutional transformation is that that's just the current day term, sis. That's just what we're calling it today. But the whole need for a balance in our constitution, you know, is actually something very old. Now, when we talk about constitution, what is it that we're talking about?
Yeah, hea tēnei mea te constitution.
Yeah, tēnei mea te constitution. Yeah, it's just ngā whakaritenga about how it is that we make decisions, how power and authority, you know, will work. And so, for example, in our constitution today, it's things like we get to vote every 3 years. You know, in some countries that's not the case. You know, 3-year thing isn't just a given. It's that we have an MMP system. You know, it's that we have 7 Māori seats in Parliament. That's the current constitutional structure that we have nationally, as well as then our, you know, we have local authorities, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Now, so constitutional transformation is then looking at, you know, changing that. The reason why Mona and that chose not to use the term change is because they didn't feel that it reflected how deeply, you know, things need to change, and that when we've talked about constitutional change before as a country, it has been things like, oh, you know, we should entrench the Māori seats, you know, or, you know, let's look at the number of people that we have in Parliament, you know, should it be under 100, you know, or are we okay with how big it is now? Or even when there has been discussion, things like, oh, you know, we should entrench, you know, Te Tiriti or Waitangi. You know, all of those things, you know, they're just tinkering around the edges, which is why one, and that was actually what we need is transformation, you know, in current day. But in terms of the kaupapa, this is a very old kaupapa. You know, so the settler parliament, the act, you know, which is now the New Zealand Parliament that we have, but it was initially called the Settler Parliament, came out of the 1852 New Zealand Constitution Act. You know, we have our first elections 1853. They have their first sittings, you know, in 1854. And we know right from 1855, you know, the tipuna of Ngāti Haua, Tarapipipi, you know, he's going to, you know, talk to them about, well, actually, you know, how is it that yous are going to work? Yous need to be in communication with Māori. He then proposes, you know, this relationship. We know that that doesn't work out. We then have, you know, the very next massive, significant constitutional thing we have then, of course, is the establishment of the kingitanga.
Yeah.
You know, we then have things like the kotahitanga parliament. And there have been different initiatives throughout our history that we've tried. Some of them have been like that, like a parliament type structure. Others have been more autonomous movements where they've said, well, no, you know, we're going to exist here. We're going to continue to operate under Māori law. You know, Pākehā, you can, you know, be out here, you're welcome here. Yeah. But we're going to carry on here, you know. And so there's been lots and lots of different things, but the one thing that they have in common has been about the ongoing exercise of our tino rangatiratanga, because that has been primarily what Parliament's challenge, and what it's called, sis, is parliamentary sovereignty. So parliamentary sovereignty is the idea that the laws that Parliament passes are then the highest laws of the land. They are the supreme law, and what happens there goes, and it's basically, for example, enforceable. So there might be things where if you then break that law, you get a fine, or you go to jail, or you go to, you know, and the issue is that those things have clashed with us, because how we do things.
Making parliamentary laws and passing acts and bills some of the ways that they totally screwed us over?
All of the ways.
All of the ways?
Yes, but the ability to do so in the very early days was by force, you know. So what we know is that they established the settler parliament. That settler parliament, whānau, just FYI, is only meant to be for settlers, which is what kāwanatanga is about, Kāwanatanga is about allowing, you know, that was about allowing one governor here to be able to govern, you know, the British subjects that were here. They have then set up their parliament, but even then they're not to pass laws about Māori, you know, including Māori land. That relationship is maintained with the British Crown. What happens is that in the 1860s, they throw that out along with the rest of the treaty, let alone Te Tiriti, sis. You know, they throw those things out, and then what happens is that New Zealand becomes a settler colony. Now, settler colony specifically, for those of you who've never heard about it, settler colonialism, okay, right. This is now, right, Whānau, we're going to spend 5 minutes in the geek life, okay? Yeah, well, all it is that, so colonisation, we've had a very specific form of colonisation happen here, which is how they managed to enforce the laws. And that is that basically colonisation, you might set up a colony and it's about the extraction of resources to help the motherland, right? It's about their economy, etc. You know, and what happens across the globe is that, you know, you might have this colonial power extract these resources, which has included people, as we know in the history of colonies, but then they go. You know, so those nations are sometimes considered to be decolonised because the power of governance has gone back then to the local people. But what we had here was a very specific form of colonialism called settler colonialism, and that's when the colonial power goes, actually, the resource that I need here isn't what we can extract. The resources, the resources that we need here is the land, and what we need the land for is as a home for our people. And so you natives that are on this land, what we need you to do is go. And so, you know, many ways that Māori have been made to go, you know, so shifted off our lands, die, you know, through diseases, be that through war, be that through, you know. Usually then what happens in a settler colony is that then those natives that are left, they are then used just like a resource in terms of a labour force. You know, so then what is extracted is our human labour, and this is where you see all the structural introduction of, you know, education, which then ensures that we're going to be a labouring, uneducated class, which is exactly what happened here. You know, so all those acts that you're talking about, it's only because of then, so clear the land of the natives, but then bring over others, and so this is how that works. This is that, you know, so we know that between 1860 and 1900, that it was about 200,000 a decade is how the Pākehā population expanded. So 1852, when they first set up Parliament, you know, it's between 54 and 56,000 is how many Pākehās are here. And by 1890, it's just short of 1 million.
Wow.
So we become a minority in this time, a politically no longer self-governing minority, where it's no longer about us welcoming a space in for our British friends, you know, as treaty partners, making them a space here on our lands. You know, by 1900s, as you know, what they're discussing is, oh, will our Māori even going to survive, or if they're going to become extinct, you know, and this has been transformed into Little England, you know, a slice of Britain in the Pacific. And it's these numbers, sis, that enable the enforcement of these laws. You know, it's the numbers that include armies, you know, that include military, and so it's by force that those things happen.
Ko taku pātai, he aha tātou I kore ai I mōhio mo tēnei kaupapa. He wāhanga nui tēnei o tō tātou hitori.
And because there's even records and kōrero in the Parliament debate documents, right, about how they wanted to exterminate us.
Yeah, what they're doing is that if you read over them, whānau, lots of New Zealanders find that really jarring. But what it is that they don't say anything, or well, they do actually. You can read it yourself. I was going to say they don't say anything that explicit, but they do in terms of that they say the time has come that we must either exterminate or civilise the Māori. You know, but there's I read a new one the other day about the Māori Land Court specifically, and what the Member of Parliament says is that it's ingenious because Māori have to travel to the cities, and what happens is that we catch sickness and die. And he says it's ingenious, you know, the system. But this is it, whānau, this is why it's important that we have an understanding of settler colonialism. It's about clearing the land of the natives to make way, you know, for others, you know, of the colonial power. And this is how we see in a very short period of time. It's really, you know, 1850s to, we know that by 1920 we have 8% of Aotearoa's whenua that's still in Māori, you know, stewardship, and it's that over this very quick period of time we have the stewardship of Aotearoa, you know, our taonga, etc., shift from the hands of our Māori ancestors into the hands of our European ancestors, you know, and, you know, at that same time that's happening, 1860s, they then start building New Zealand, you know, the education system, the health system, the political system. And so that's what makes things like this so scary, sis. You were right about it being scary, is because the types of things that they're talking about, you know, this is the thinking that's happening, you know, at the time, is that actually no, there isn't a special place for Māori as tangata whenua here in Aotearoa. You know, what we're doing is that we're building a society where those things are not valued, and
Hu aua pea ki ētahi te whakarongo ki ēnei kōrero. I get it. It's our history though, and we need to learn about it and know about it for us to move forward.
But despite all of that, you know, kei konei tātou,
Yes.
e tūana, e tū Māori ana, e tū pakari ana. So when you talk about Matike Mai, what is that vision?
Yeah. Right, whānau. So, yeah, sorry, went off on a tangent there. But it is so, you know, we know that that is the, you know, that the parliamentary system or the constitutional system, the decision-making system that was set up during that settler colonial period and is still today, like that's the same parliament, you know.
Yeah, do you actually think that there has been much
Well, the
change?
thing is that, you know, well, obviously you can't talk about exterminating people anymore, but, you know, outwardly, you know, but I mean, in terms of the ways that you can continue to oppress Māori, that's happening. But the thing is that, so constitutional transformation is that idea that actually what we need to do, you know, is restore tino rangatiratanga. Because what has happened is that, so it's in that 1860s period that they just throw both treaties out, you know, so nothing to do with conflicts in the text or anything like that. They throw both treaties out. Instead, they start talking about, you know, the things we were discussing. And then what happens, you know, is that kāwanatanga is then expanded over Māori. This is when it happens. And this is why I'm so incredibly grateful for the work of the tribunal, because as a squad, Te Atukari educators, you know, we were trying to figure out, well, how did that happen? Because there's not only Te Tiriti or Waitangi, but it says specifically in the 1852 Act, they will not pass laws about Māori, including Māori land. And so the report literally just came out in December.
Mena e rangirua ana koe mō ngā kōrero mo Te Waitangi Tribunal. Tap into our episode with Carwyn Jones. He does a really good job of breaking it down for us.
So it's the report, it's the stage 2 report by Te Papa o Te Raki, so this is about the Ngāpuhi claim, where what happened is that Governor Grey in the 1860s, he sends a memo back to the Colonial Office in Britain and goes, so I'm going to start making decisions about Māori. You tell me if you want me to stop doing that. And this is how we then get these, you know, these huge Suppression of Rebellion Act, New Zealand Settlements Act, you know, all of that type of thing happening. And the thing is that, so, you know, if we're being pono te tiriti, if we are actually talking about a te tiriti-based society, then we must address the rebalancing of tino rangatiratanga with kāwanatanga. You know, because it's not that Māori didn't have a right to engage in kāwanatanga, we did, and that's Article 3. So ngā tikanga katoa te tahi, you know, all the rights. So we have a right to engage in kāwanatanga should we wish to do so. But primarily, first and foremost, you know, it's te tino rangatiratanga. You know, o rātou whenua, o rātou kāinga, o rātou taonga. And so the promise is that basically that Māori society would have been able to continue. Now, the other thing, you know, so we need to address, well, so what does that look like? As said, we've tried lots of different things. We've tried the Māori parliaments. As you all know, there's kōrero come up about Māori parliaments again. There's other things like the Māori, you know, Congress. I know Eru talked about he whakaputanga, so that's what they talked about, you know, even there before treaties times. But basically, in terms of the restoration of tino rangatiratanga being the goal, you know, but that's only because we've had this encroachment of kāwanatanga over our lives, you know, and a complete oppression, and it was through force, of tino rangatiratanga. Matike Mai, in terms of today, you know, is saying, okay, so how is it that we could rebalance those things now? But the issue being that we have this major challenge, sis, because in 1860s and 1870s and 1880s, people knew what tino rangatiratanga was, you know, well, because they had it.
For those who are listening who might not actually know what tino rangatiratanga is, how would you explain that? I know it's hard to explain. Okay, tino rangatiratanga is a kupu that, you know, we talk about a lot. And mō tātou ngai Māori, e mōhio ana tātou ki te
yeah.
rakupu, me te mana o te rakupu, but
Yeah.
Pākehā always try and find a translation of it.
I see
and
what you mean,
it's
sis,
like,
yeah.
so what for Pākehā, like what is the best way to explain that kupu and what it means to us?
Well, what it's not is your individual right over your property. That belongs to all New Zealanders. It's not that. Of course, that's just the latest Treaty Principles Bill. What it's also not, though, is the 1989 Crown Principles for Action on Te Tiriti, where it was defined as self-management, which was basically the same thing. That iwi, you have the right to organise as iwi, and under the law, to manage your resources as your own. Now, the thing is that those things might be included as part of the rights that you would exercise in terms of tino rangatiratanga, but tino rangatiratanga is way broader than that. But all I'll say is that how Māori life was operating in 1840 is what tino rangatiratanga is, in terms of it's our right to make all decisions. And so the issue with the focus on property is because it's about things. They've literally commodified what it is that rangatiratanga might be over, where of course it was over our lives. It's people, that we would continue to, conduct ourselves in the way, that we do. And this way, that's what's based on tikanga. So just to go back, it is that, the issue that we have today is that 1860, all of those times, our people knew what tino rangatiratanga was. Because of that, they knew what it meant to have a political system, political decision-making, or a constitutional system based on who we were as Māori, because that's what we were doing. Those things were oppressed, over that time. And sure enough, 1900s, what's our brand new priority? Survival, So the issue that we have today, which is why Matike Mai is a little bit more explicit in its basis, is saying, well, what does that actually look like? What would a tino rangatiratanga, system look like today? How would we balance that with kāwanatanga? And so this is why the Matike Mai approach, just in terms of being the latest constitutional thing that our people, Māori, are doing, is that it is a little bit more explicit in terms of, exploring with our people what are some of the things. So Matike Mai has 4 foundations, okay? The first one is tikanga and kawa. Because people might go, oh, what's that got to do with it? Because that's just Māori LORE, or it's Māori protocols, and no, it's law. So people like Ani Makaere forever have been going, no, tikanga is the first law of the land. It's not cultural protocols. And this is why, this is another exciting thing, by the way, is everything that's happening in the courts. Because as you'll know, we've had this huge breakthrough with now courts actually going, oh yeah, tikanga is the first law of the land, LAW.
Yeah, because when you call it LORE, it kind of diminishes it a bit, right? It's like myths and fairy tales.
Yeah,
and
myths and fairy tales practiced by, noble savages.
Savages.
Yeah, well it is, that whole thing. And this is why, so LAW, so this is the thing first, is saying, well, actually our tikanga and kawa, are our first laws, and that, though, so they are constitutionally relevant, it's in terms of that, well, it's tikanga that guides us on how decision making. If you think that a constitution is just how does power and authority operate, it's how we've decided as a country. And that's what I mean. It's, like today, you can vote every 3 years type thing, but it's how power and authority operates. And so what is in our tikanga and our kawa that guides us on how things are? So that's the first po. The second po is then he whakaputanga. What are the things in there? We know that that is actually a declaration to the world, about our rangatiratanga. So that's one of the important references to what rangatiratanga might mean. It's literally in the title, Declaration of Independence. So, what did that independence then actually look like? We then have, the third po is then Te Tiriti or Waitangi. So what are the specific things in there about how a constitution should work? And it's very clear in terms of kāwanatanga and tino rangatiratanga, what tino rangatiratanga would be, it would be about especially, but also Article 3, that Māori can have access, and can engage in kāwanatanga if we wish to. There's also Article 4 whānau, which is a discussion that I'm yet to see happen, but what might be the constitutional significance of religious freedom, because that's what Article 4 is about, is about, so there's two provisions, ngā whakapono katoa, all the faiths, but also ritenga Māori, which is Māori, it's the term they use to describe Māori spiritual practices, and why is that constitutionally significant? Because that's what our kawa and tikanga is about, it is about tapu, it is about mana, which is it's your political integrity, but of course, because, from a Māori worldview, that's spiritual political integrity. So, there's all of those things. So Te Tiriti is then the other foundation. The last po, in terms of our constitutional efforts today is then what are the international Indigenous rights documents that also can assist us in our thinking. And so that's things like the UNDRIP, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And for anyone who hasn't read those, this is Kokoroni's lifetime homework, okay? You've got to go and read these things, whānau, because they are, really beautiful. We have a checkered history as a country with the UNDRIP, because we know, people like Mona over 20 years, it was like in the 1980s, the Indigenous nations started to, protest and agitate for the recognition, of Indigenous rights. So we know that people like Mona and others from Aotearoa were at the forefront of getting that document developed. Once it finally got through to what they call the General Assembly, and that this, there's sort of different pathways in the UN whānau, but once it finally got through, all nation states or recognised governments, need to vote on it. And there were 4 nation states in the world that voted no, they actually voted against. And who were they? America. Australia, Canada. And New Zealand. And what do those 4 places all have in common, sis?
They're all really terrible to their Indigenous people.
And specifically, they are settler colonies.
Right.
Where the Indigenous peoples are now minority, and the rest of the, peoples in that nation are built upon and benefit, from the stealing of Indigenous lands and, taonga and the use of then those Indigenous peoples as a labour class, all of those things, and this is, if you also read the statements by those 4 nations about why they rejected it, they're awful. It was things like, Indigenous laws aren't really laws, and Indigenous peoples aren't really peoples in terms of other United Nations documents that talk about the rights of all people to self-determination. So anyway, the UNDRIP is really important. It has lots of articles in there, but they do talk about things about specifically, Indigenous rights to self-determination. And so we, didn't sign it. It was then under Mr. Key's government that Papa Peter Sharples took off to New York to sign it. And I don't know if anyone knows the story, but this was straight from him, is that, part of that relationship that the Māori Party had with National is that, Papa Peter had been, hassling him about the UNDRIP. And you know how, like, Mr. Key's sort of cash?
Yeah.
Yes, sis. And he was like, oh, yeah, I suppose. And so that was Papa Peter on a plane
out of there.
Straight up to New York to get it signed. Now, as a signatory now, we are meant to report every year on the progress that we are making towards the articles of the UNDRIP. And so it was under Minister Mahuta, Nanaia, that we formed a group. They came up with a report how to do it. And what was that report? He puapua. And what did it say? It said Matike Mai.
Yeah.
That what we need to do is work towards a Matike Mai model. And again, all that is that we say those are those 4 po that we need to draw upon, that people need to deepen their understanding of in terms of what might be different futures. But really it's about one thing, and that is about our rangatiratanga is something that is an inherent right with how we should be able to operate today. But kāwanatanga has encroached over that space and our ability to do that, including parliamentary sovereignty and all those laws that you're talking about. So what we need is this restoration. What is that actually going to look like? Well, that is the task that's before all of us. That we need to first deepen our understanding on these matters, and then together, come up with, what might be the system. Mona and that give a lot of guidance in Matike Mai about values, so that's a good place to start. But, but it's going to be up to all of us, sis.
One of the biggest fears is this myth that if Māori succeed, that will result in the oppression of non-Māori, or that they're going to lose something. Engari, ki te mārama koe ki te ahurea Māori, e hara mātou I te pērā.
So how do we have these conversations with Pākehā, with tauiwi, to say it's not that scary and you should just get on board the waka?
Yeah, but you know what, sis, I have to be honest with you, is that I'm always honest, you know, in any of my teaching, and you know, when a Pākehā or tauiwi say, oh, you know, I'm afraid, Veronica, because I'm going to lose something, and I say,
They're going to come and take my house, right?
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that I'm always honest, is that I say, we are going to lose something. You're going to lose your privilege, but you should want to lose that because that's unjust. You know, you should want to live in a society that is just, where everyone benefits. And so, you know, that is going to mean that the unjust benefits, you know, that you have, that you accrue just from, you know, being the descendant of, you know, of the European settlers, you know, that's going to stop, but you should want that to stop. You know, and so, you know, in terms of...
And what do they say when you say that to them? They're like, yeah, no, I don't want to actually lose my house in Kohimarama.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? It's funny, sis, because lots of people, of course, you know, but even, you know, I'm like, oh no, yes, my own privileged things in terms of actual property, if that's what you're talking about. But, you know, there's other New Zealanders who know that injustice manifests in lots of ways. It manifests in social harm, it manifests in higher crime rates, it manifests, you know. And so actually, if we are going to contribute to, you know, a more peaceful society, you know, a more just society, you know, where everyone is able to, you know, live well, then that actually requires those, you know, with resources to, you know, to be able to give up these positions. So of course there's some individuals who are like, no, I'm just going to build a high gate, you know, but there are others that understand inherently, you know, the whole point of being a citizen of society is that you are not an island. You know, you are connected to others, and that, you know, your well-being is inherently connected to others. And so we must be proactive. And the number of people who are beginning to rise as tangata tiriti, in terms of those that are actually committed to, one, deepening their learning, two, then honouring te tiriti however they can, that number over the last year has just expanded amazingly. And praise the Lord, sis, we already have a whole lot of tauiwi and Pākehā support systems in place. And this is what's really important, is that I say, whānau, you know, if you want to honour te tiriti, you know, there's lots of things that you can do as an individual, but that's actually not where it's at.
Yeah.
You know, you need to go find your squad, go find your collective, and we have lots of different groups, like there's Kotare Trust, you know, there's Tauiwi Tautoko, you know, there's the Pākehā Project.
It's a cool name, Tauiwi Tautoko.
It's cool. That's a program that's run by a Canadian political scientist called Emily Boysley, and it's how to combat online racism, and it's primarily Pākehā who do it. Yeah, it's amazing. The Pākehā Project by Rebecca Sinclair, specifically about, I think, or there's people like Richard Shaw, you know, so Richard Shaw was a professor of mine, always been a really you know, a great supporter and ally of Māori development. Like, I'd ask him to do all types of crazy stuff. You know, like he came out really strong against Don Brash those 20 years ago when we had our last iteration, you know, of racism in the political parties really bad, you know. And what he's done over the last couple of years is so amazing. You know, so yes, has always been an advocate for Māori development, but then over the last couple of years, he's turned around and gone, so how did my family get that land at Parihaka? You know, and how did they get it? His great-grandfather helped invade.
Yeah.
You know, and so he's written a book about that, The Forgotten Coast, got a lot of hate. And so now what he has done is he's also written another book called The Unsettled, and it's about, basically it's an encouragement for Pākehā to reconcile, you know, their history. And what I've always said is that that's a very, they may not realise it, but it's a very Māori thing to do. You know, realising that you have the opportunity to basically fix your whakapapa up, you know, and that, you know, we know lots of Pākehā are afraid to look into their history because they're like, you know, but what if we were colonisers? You know, well, undoubtedly you were. And I tell you what, it's like, you know, I'd be looking that up quick smart actually, because the opportunity that you have then to be able to fix that up is amazing. So that's the thing, you know, with Pākehā in terms of the pathways. Māori, what we ask them to do, you know, is that they need to then engage in kaupapa, you know. So, and there are so many different things. So, you know, get back to your marae, you know, join a kohanga reo, commit to te reo, you know, and send your kids to kohanga reo, you know, join any one of the political collectives, you know, get involved, you know, in different activities. You know, there are so many things that people can do. And so it's sort of like that, like we need Pākehā to investigate who they are and come to that acceptance. What we need, you know, Māori to then do is that we need to focus on that restoration of tino rangatiratanga, you know, which is, you know, where is that? It's in your environment, you know, it's outside in the taiao, it's then at your marae, you know, it's in your hood, you know, at the kohanga reo in your hood, it's, you know, all of those things. Yep. There's heaps to do is what I'm saying. Heaps.
Nui ngā mahi.
Yeah.
Ko tētahi o ngā mea nui, ko te noho tahi. We look after each other and we look after the environment.
What could a future with Matike Mai look like?
Well, first it's values, eh? So there are 7 values to Matike Mai. You know, and they're really beautiful. Just have a look at them, whānau, because they're not just values for Māori. You know, don't get me wrong, there are some things that are specific. Like one of the values is the value of belonging, you know, which is about first and foremost that a constitution should recognise the Indigenous status of Māori as tangata whenua. You know, why do we have to do that? Well, right now is a perfect example, you know, where we don't have, you know, protections in place to allow us to be who we are, you know, but under that very same principle of belonging, it also says, and Te Tiriti or Waitangi is the basis within which we can reach out to new migrants and ensure they have a sense of belonging here. You know, so there's things like that. There's also, you know, the value of place. And so the value of place is specifically that at the very foundation of any constitution that we have must be the protection of papa tuanuku. Like there is absolutely no point, you know, in going on and, you know, scrapping about, you know, what a political system is going to look like rah-rah, where we're actually going to have nowhere to be.
Yeah, no whenua.
Yeah, no whenua, yeah. And this is one of the things that we were discussing earlier, is that actually, you know, the attack on Indigenous rights, even though it's put across as being a defence of equality of all people, well, what we know is that since, you know, the 1850s, 1860s, there's been attack on Indigenous rights, you know, and that has been about, you know, the exploitation of resources, you know, and it's the very same today because we know that, you know, it's Indigenous rights that are actually the primary challenger of those that are wishing to continue to mine, that are wishing to continue to exploit. And so, you know, there would, you know, whereas in, you know, we're very clear, you know, the world's not ours to exploit, it's ours to care for in our time, you know, for the lives of our mokopuna. So it's about that long game, you know, and papa tuanuku and ranginui, you know, but that the thing for te taiao must be one of the values. And they have done this in other countries. I won't go into that too much, but, you know, Professor Claire Charters, Erin Matariki-Ka, you know, they have been studying, you know, other places overseas where we do have, you know, places that have enshrined the rights, you know, of the environment into their constitutions. So, you know, that's one of the things that it would look at. But there's several values whānau. Obviously one, the rebalancing, you know, of tino rangatiratanga with kāwanatanga. And this is the difficulty because, you know, parliamentary sovereignty, you know, that idea that no, whatever Parliament passes, that's what says. In Māori, if you break that, we then enter the criminal justice system. You know, depending on what depending on how severe, you know, the punishment is, and the whole idea that actually, oh no, the geeky technical things, this is what Crown lawyers argue, is that sovereignty is, you know, indivisible, like that it can only be held in one place. Yeah. But actually that's not true. If you look overseas, if you look at how other political systems work, you know, there's often, you know, lots of different places, you know, there's a Sami parliament, even how, you know, Indian country works, they call Indian country all the reservations, you know, and in the Americas, you know, they have this form of independent, you know, but domestic sovereignty. I'm not an expert on any of those things, but even I know, you know, that that's not the case. And so there's lots of political theorists. One is called Dominic O'Sullivan, who's a Māori. He's from Ngāti Porou, I believe. You know, but there are people that are thinking through these things, and he's even like, I think one of his latest publications was literally called Sharing the Sovereign.
Ki te titiro ki te tiriti, he mārama tōna ngako. He pōhiri i te Pākehā ki te whakahaere i a anō. He waiho i a tātou ngā tino rangatira o te whenua. Kia noho hei mana whakahaere i a tātou anō.
Well, would the goal be for us to just govern ourselves independent of the Crown? And do you think that's even possible in our lifetime?
Of course it is. But it's a little, but there's sort of layers to it because it's like, so at the last election, you know, I had some Matike Mai rangatahi contact me and go, oh, Ronnie, you know, we don't vote, like we don't vote, you know, because that's selling out to kāwanatanga, you know, thing tino rangatiratanga. And I've just said, you know, well, it's your choice, darling. You know, I'd never say, you know, what to do, except what I did point out was, but then just know that that is, you know, giving up your Article 3 right, you know, that you do have a right to participate if you want. And saying that, you know, on the other hand of that is that what people fear is that, well, by voting, are we then consenting, you know, are we then consenting to kāwanatanga? Are we saying, yes, that system is over us? Because I know some people that don't vote because of that.
Yeah.
But then that, you know, you just keep on going down that road, sis. That means everything. That means the Māori seats in Parliament, you know, are those a complete waste of time? You know, is that just within the kāwanatanga system? Well, you know, well, someone like me would say, well, they're like really important, oh my God, because we need them to try and minimise harm, you know. If they could actually achieve anything, that would be amazing, you know, but that's not a level of expectation that I have of them, but certainly try and minimise and prevent harm. And so what Matike Mai says, you know, it's not necessarily about that, you know, Māori would be over here and then everyone else is over here, you know, because we have that right to engage if we want to, but certainly the oppressions of the rights of Māori to make our own decisions about our lands, you know, to make our own decisions about, you know, Tonga, you know, the protection of Papa in those places that we want, all of those types of things. There definitely needs to be a rebalancing, you know. You know, we already have lots of examples of that. You know, we know that they struggle, but in terms of the decision making that like marae committees make, you know, all of those types of things. The issue is that then when we have laws that have been passed by kāwanatanga that then directly impact those. And so the future constitutional structure will have that sussed. I believe it's the value of conciliation, one of the 7 values of Matike Mai. And that is that when we have a disagreement, you know, there has to be some sort of system, you know, where we can come together and talk about that. Because what happens now, as said, is Parliament just passes law. Oh, next minute, if we're trying to protest that, we all know what happened to protesters. You know, you get locked up. And so it must be that there is something, that there is another way. Because one thing I must say about Matike Mai is that Matike Mai is not looking to destroy kāwanatanga. You know, what it is about is saying, you know, that we need respect for both. But what we have right now is the absolute dominance of one and the absolute struggle of another. And Māori don't want to be in charge for the sake of being in charge. That's where often the fear comes from, is that, you know, non-Māori go, oh my goodness, we've been so terrible, and now Māori are going to do just the same to us. Well, one, you know, just learn about Māori society, whānau. That's not actually it. You know, we're the most inclusive people on the blooming planet.
Or not.
You know, honestly. But also, you know, that it's our tikanga. But the thing is that as well is that the purpose of tino rangatiratanga, and this is why it's a constitutional discussion, is for that power-making, you know, authority, the decision-making authority. Why do we want that decision-making authority? Because our decisions are different. You know, they are based on different tikanga, values, philosophies, worldviews, you know, all of those things. It's not just for the sake of being in power. It's because of what that then means in terms of what we are able to enable, what we are able to protect, what we are able to advance, you know, and that's what people don't get, is that they just think, oh, you know, oh, Māori is this group that's going to take over. Well, no, it's because we're actually different. This is why you need Māori seats. And, you know, this is why, that's why even now in the minimum, this is why we need Māori seats in Parliament. This is why we need the Māori wards, but this is why we need the restoration of the rangatiratanga sphere, because we would just, you know, the most beautiful future lies ahead of us. We're one where we are, you know, fully be able to express ourselves as Māori. And I tell you what, anyone that's afraid, they only need to look at our kids. You know, those that are at wharekura and kura, like they just have the most beautiful understanding of who we are. You know, and I just look at them and think, oh my God, that's our future. That's everything we could be. Okay, sorry. But, you know, it's so true. Like my kids, you know, and people go, oh, well, you know, what's an example of how beautiful? And read Te Aho Matua, you know, the philosophy of our schools. And, you know, I often introduce people to Te Aho Matua, like my students, you know, who are non-Māori, and they read it and they're so moved and they're like, that's what we need in every school. Because, you know,
Te Aho Matua is the answer.
Te Aho Matua is just an example in education. Imagine if we had a Te Aho Matua and Te Aho Matua system in health, in the way that we deal with those that have caused social harm, in the way that we approach the environment. You know, it's just the most amazing, beautiful future ahead of us, but we must have the space, or what they say in UNDRIP is the freedoms to do so. Oh my goodness, sorry. But I'm just telling you, it's so beautiful, this future, you know, and I know that we can have it, but it must commit to those that have unjust privileges to let those things go, you know, make way, and that, you know, to not be afraid. They can only but gain from it, you know, because it's not like Māori are pushing people out, you know, it's inclusive, and it's just, they just need to join us, you know, they need to join us, yeah.
When you start talking about your tamariki too, like in the future that you want for them, that's different from the future that their grandparents had.
Well, that's right. That's exactly right. And, you know, it's, you know, that's why I'm just so incredibly grateful. This is probably the other part of it, is that, you know, Matike Mai and constitutional transformation may sound like something like, you know, when I first say, you know, when they're like, Ronnie, what's the goal? And I'm like, oh, you know, changing the constitutional system. And they're like, whoa, sister, you know, is that realistic? You know, are we going to get there? And I just say, well, you know, we must. We don't have a choice. You know, if you look at, you know, everything that generation did before us, you know, and also what they had to deal with as well, you know, like, you know, people like Mariana Pittman, you know, were being bashed. You know, they literally had, that was the thing of the police. So we're, you know, or literally they're collecting signatures for the reo because the idea is that it might die. You know, that's so scary. And I try and explain that to my babies, who are all kura kids, you know, and they're just like, whatever, mum. You know, like they don't even believe me.
Yeah, because they get to live in a world where it's amazing to be Māori. And they go to kura and they speak Māori, and their whole ahurea
that's right,
is Māori. And that's so beautiful.
And it really is. And that's the whole thing, is that so we don't have a choice as to, you know, continuing this, because it's literally, we have this huge legacy, you know, of struggle that has come before us in terms of ensuring that tino rangatiratanga can be restored for that purpose, because its purpose is so that te ao Māori can live and thrive and flourish, and all the wellness and amazingness that then those that come after us will experience from, you know. And you just think, you know, all, you know, a lot of the trauma that, you know, our pakeke and that suffered was because, you know, that system that is set up in terms of, we're going to take your lands, but we're also now going to take your labour, you know, and you're just going to be the labourers, you know, that relies on dehumanising a people, you know, and it relies on generating a self-hate in people. So it's what we call internalised colonialism, you know, and those are those ones that, you know, really believe, oh, well, Māori are just violent, you know, and Māori are just, you know, dumb, and oh, I might as well, you know, give up school now because I'm only ever going to be a labourer, you know. Those ideas are not natural to us, you know, like, hello, you know, we only have to look back at any of our kōrero tahito, you know, about tāne, about all of the amazing things, you know, even recent histories, all the amazing things. But that's why if you can oppress all that knowledge, you know, and you can just make people think that actually your role in life is going to be this, you know, and so that's, you know, those are the struggles that the people before us have had to go through, and those ones that stood up and said, well, actually, you know, I'm going to reject this, you know, I'm going to do everything I can to learn te reo, you know, that we've come so incredibly far as a society. You know, like I have to try and, you know, tell my kids, oh, wharekura didn't exist when I was at high school, and they can barely believe that, you know, and so we must continue to advance everything that those ones before us, you know, they didn't do all that so that we could just go, oh, sweet, you know, we've got the reo, or oh, sweet, we've got kura. One, we know that it's still tiny majority of, you know, our babies that actually are able to tend that for all sorts of issues, you know, all sorts. But the thing is that the absolute beauty when you have a system, when you're growing up and you know that you can just be fully yourself, you know, whānau. And just one last thing is that, because the cost, you know, like we could just go, oh, sweet, you know, look, we've got the reo, we've got all these things, let's just, you know, like have a break, you know, Ronnie, I'm tired, you know, and it's like, well, actually the cost of that, is all those ones that still don't have access to that world. And how does it manifest us? It manifests in self-harm. It manifests in drug abuse, alcohol abuse, our people committing social harms and going to jail because they don't know their own worth, and it's just all this lost potential about who we could be, living well, and addressing all the major urgent issues that are before us, like climate change, like entrenched poverty, like across the world, we have all types of, we have famines, we have, lack of food security, those are all major things that we need to deal with urgently, and it's in that system where our babies know that they are absolutely loved and cherished and can achieve anything. Why? Because not only do their teachers teach them that, but everything that they learn about what it means to be Māori is that, which it is, that's, if we don't continue to push that, then that's the cost, is that we don't have all this beautiful development, and growth into everything that we could be.
There's just so much potential. I'm really grateful for people like Ronnie, Moana Jackson, and Whai Market. Without them speaking that language, how would we know where our future might sit?
So mehe mea e hehi ana tātou ki te tuki e tēnei mea, te transformational change.
Yeah.
Hea te huarahi.
Yeah. Tuatahi pānui he tauari puata. So the independent working group on constitutional transformation, tauari puata I te tuatahi. Kātahi ruku he ngā kōrero. So it says directly in there, there's a section on this is the constitutional relevance of tikanga and kawa. This is the constitutional relevance of he whakaputanga, of Te Tiriti, of things like the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That's not the only one either. There's other things. Kātahi pānui he ngā, uara. They then talk about those, values, mātāpono. They're not really principles, but it really is, their values in terms of, what are those core things, that might make up a constitution that honours then tikanga and kawa. And I really mean it, whānau, like one of the values, I know I didn't mention it before, was community. And they're really so steeped in a te ao Māori perspective, because the notion of community, or even the notion of tikanga, so the value of tikanga that is in there, it's that we're actually anyone that has, power, or decision-making authority, as per tikanga, must consider the outcome of their decisions on relationships, and people would go, hey, on relationships, and it's like, yes, on relationships, because actually from a te ao Māori perspective, that's what makes the entire world go round, be it your relationship to the taiao, be it your relationship to, your whanaunga, be it your relationship to someone who's not your whanaunga, and that could just expand out in terms of then our relationships to other nations overseas, and so really read those values, whānau, they're just in that Matike Mai report, and that's just what it's called, the independent report, working groups report.
So once we've read all these values and we know what it means, how do we actually get it started? Like, who do we talk to?
Right,
Do we have to go and see King Charles and be like, ane ngā uara?
No, sis. And so the very first thing, so this is how all political change happens, is the creation of a critical mass that is then the will of the people. So first and foremost, this is why we say, if engaging with kāwanatanga is your thing, for example, that you don't mind going and being a politician as scrapping, you don't mind doing the submission thing, or you don't mind doing the protest thing, you can continue to do that. But that really, we've had a good dash with kāwanatanga whānau, that actually now the most important thing is the restoration of tino rangatiratanga, because it's, we're going to aim for that change, sis, but we can't wait for then, and it's about developing our capacity, because what happens is that, say we get constitutional transformation, they turn around and they say to hapu and iwi o marae, like, right, okay, yes, we're going to start, we need now your input into decision making at the national level. Well, the thing is that we know the state of many of our marae, we know the state of many of our hapu, there are still lots of challenges that we have, and so the thing that we're saying to people is that, yep, if you're scrappy, get in there with kāwanatanga, but I'm not sure that we can get much further there, in terms of that, the current government's a perfect example. Things will come and go. What we need you to do is, we need you to we need the rebuilding of te ao Māori as much as possible, so that when that time comes where we have that critical mass of understanding and can actually start looking at some start looking at those structural changes is what I assume we're talking about, like how can we actually get some structural change? So there's a long, long pathway there. And the most urgent thing right now, is it's get back to your marae, it's get involved in kaupapa, how it's even things like, like even starting in the home. And I know people, people might think it's cheesy or it's just like a stereotype now, but we really mean it. Speak te reo to your kids, make sure that they're imbued in te ao Māori as much as possible, and, grow yourself a blooming garden, all of those types of things, but connect to your collective, because every decision a marae makes is a political decision. That's every decision that, is made by then, any number of Māori collectives are political decisions, and so it's actually exercising those things right now and strengthening that, so honestly, whānau, anyone watching, if you're not connected to your marae, and this is the thing, is that, so I'm from Ngāti Porou, right, and we have heaps of Ngāti Porou ki te whenua, we're called, except, because of all the things that happen, we have lots that are don't have a connection back home and don't ever go home. And I'm like, look, whānau, we've got 3 hui. We've got the sports hui, the pāwars, we've got the kapahaka hui, tamararos, we've got the academic geek life hui, just pick one, anyone, whatever one you're into, sports, kapas, and just go, go. And that's just our iwi, there's, things that are happening all the time to widen our embrace of our people. And so, just that's what we need, is that we need that right now. That future's coming to us in terms of that structural change that you're talking about, but Matike Mai is about living tino rangatiratanga as much as we possibly can, because the thing is that that's how we then expand, how tino rangatiratanga is operating. And this is why, for me, the quality that we have, or the right that we have, is actually, what we would refer to as mana. Tino rangatiratanga is a doing thing, and so what we need to do is do it, as much as we can. For me, it's a doing. It's not tino rangatiratanga if you're not a doing, but it's a right to do. It is a right, but a right to do, we just need to exercise tino rangatiratanga as much as we can, and that's not just iwi chairs whānau, it's not just runanga. It's your whānau. It's about being involved for a kaupapa, and this is our real task, is that all those Māori that are isolated but particularly don't have access to te ao Māori, oh my gosh, it's the biggest
If you could mobilise
gift.
them, the things that we could achieve would be immeasurable.
Yeah, and particularly, then of course those that are ready to then be involved in political kaupapa, because we need to decide what it looks like. What does it look like, sis? All the suggestions, the Māori parliaments, the blah, 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 all the ideas from He Whakaputanga, Congress, or, other things, but that will be for us all to decide. But we will get that once we are exercising tino rangatiratanga as much as we can, and when we will get constitutional changes, when tino rangatiratanga is absolutely bursting at the seams, and it's so beautiful, and it'll happen because just everyone will want to be involved.
Mihi ka tika ki a koe. Thank you so much for that amazing kōrero. He kaupapa nui, he mahi nui kei te haere, but hikaka ana hau, I feel very, very convinced that in my lifetime, we can achieve it.
So can.
Ko te reo, te take.